In the waning days of the old Earth, before the stars had truly been reclaimed, Ahzek Ahriman was born into the techno-barbarian nobility of the Achaemenid Empire, a wealthy tribe whose kings had cast their lot with the Emperor of Mankind during the brutal Unification Wars. Thanks to this early allegiance, Ahriman's people were spared the worst of the atomic firestorms and gene warrior invasions that ravaged Terra during that era. It was a rare mercy in a time of relentless destruction. When peace at last blanketed Terra beneath the banner of the nascent Imperium, and the Emperor forged his fateful alliance with the Mechanicum of Mars, Ahriman and his twin brother, Ormuzd, were chosen to join the new force being raised to reclaim the stars, the Space Marine Legions. Inducted into the 15th Legion, later to be named the Thousand Sons, Ahzek fought alongside the Emperor during the earliest campaigns of the Great Crusade. But within 5 standard years, strange changes began to manifest among his gene brothers. Some developed psychic gifts, powerful, unnatural talents of the mind. Others fell victim to the Legion's hidden curse, the dreaded flesh change, a horrifying mutation that twisted Space Marines into gibbering beasts. Many were euthanized by their own brothers, and soon the Imperium itself questioned whether the Thousand Sons should be disbanded as a genetically flawed legion. The corruption cut deep. Ahzek lost his twin to the mutation, a grief that haunted him and birthed an unshakable fear of what might yet come for the rest. As a silent vow, he had Ormuzd cherished pendant, a gift from their mother, worked into the shoulder guard of his power armor, mirroring the one he wore himself. Then came Prospero. When the Thousand Sons rediscovered their lost Primarch, Magnus the Red, the crimson giant of Cyclopean gaze, hope returned. Magnus brought with him a cure, or so it seemed. Through mysterious, possibly sorcerous methods, and at the cost of one of his own eyes, Magnus halted the flesh change. Few spoke aloud of the price he paid. Fewer still dared to ask what force had answered his plea. While Ahriman's exploits during the Great Crusade were not widely recorded, it is known that he was, for a time, seconded to the Word-Bearers Legion. There, surrounded by warriors who openly deified the Emperor in defiance of imperial truth, he felt uncomfortable. Yet even among them, he found a strange camaraderie, particularly with the Legion's chaplain, Erebus, who would later play a pivotal role in galactic betrayal. Ahriman, ever a believer in the power of knowledge, supported the Emperor's initiative to embed remembrancers, Imperial civilian historians, within the Crusade's armies. He believed that if the galaxy could witness the Thousand Sons for what they truly were, then the fear of psychic power might one day fade. Records place Ahriman at the Agoru campaign, near the end of the 2nd century of the Great Crusade. There, The 28th Expeditionary Fleet, aided by the Space Wolves, brought a pre-industrial world into compliance. During this campaign, Ahriman defied Magnus's explicit orders and would lead a search party to find their absent Primarch. This would mark the first time he would openly question Magnus's judgment, and it would not be the last. While on Aghoru, Ahriman encountered Rune Priest Othir Wordmake of the Space Wolves. They spoke of psychic power as brothers in arms, or so Ahriman believed. He shared knowledge of Thousand Sons' disciplines in good faith, not realizing Wordmake would later twist that confidence into condemnation. And yet, their cooperation on Aghoru would soon prove essential, as both legions faced warped spawn horrors, weapon forms, monstrous entities not unlike demons or corrupted titans. In this, Ahriman and the wolves first glimpsed the truth of chaos. During this time, Ahriman was also tasked with mentoring a young remembrancer, Lemuel Gallman, who showed signs of psychic potential. Ahriman trained him carefully, even bringing him into combat during the Heliosa pacification, where once again the flesh change re-emerged. Ahriman watched, hollow-eyed, as space wolves executed the twisted remains of his brothers. Though Magnus had once promised the mutations were gone forever, their return seared a deep wound into Ahriman's soul, one even Gallman could feel. Ahriman was also present at Olenor when the Emperor elevated Horus to War Master. He also stood as witness at the Council of Nicaea, where the fate of Psykers across the Imperium was debated and ultimately sealed. To Ahriman, the council felt less like a deliberation and more like a trial, with the Thousand Sons as the accused. Then came betrayal. The first to speak against the Thousand Sons' practices was none other than Othir Wordmake, the space wolf Ahriman had once called friend. Worse still, it was at Nicaea that Ahriman first learned the darkest truth of his legion's salvation. Magnus had made a pact, however veiled, with the warp itself. The deal that ended the flesh change was born of sorcery and ruinous power, a revelation that threatened to prove their accusers right. In horror, Ahriman confronted Magnus, but before he could fully comprehend the depths of his Primarch's dealings, Magnus stripped the memory from his mind. By the time the Horus heresy began, Ahriman had risen to power within the Thousand Sons. He was now Chief Librarian, commander of the elite Scarab occult, and captain of the First Fellowship. He led the cult of the Corvidae, masters of precognition and seers of fate, those who read the strands of possibilities like others read maps. Alongside others like Amon and Anku Anan, Ahriman grew increasingly concerned by Magnus's growing secrecy and withdrawal. Their Primarch, it seemed, was unraveling mysteries of terrible scale beneath the vaults of Tzeentch, chasing visions no one else could see. Magnus had foreseen something dire, the downfall of Horus, the betrayal of the Imperium, a galactic civil war, an age of darkness, prophesied long ago by ancient Terran mystics. He believed the Kynbrock Anathame, a cursed Xenos blade, would wound Horus on the moon of Davin. From that wound, something primordial would reach out to claim him. In a desperate attempt to avert this fate, Magnus began preparing a ritual, one that would allow him to project his consciousness into the warp and protect Horus's soul. Amon scoured ancient works in hopes of finding a way to save the War Master. Ahriman and the Corvidae were ordered to do whatever it took to understand what was coming. But it was too late. Horus fell. The wound was struck, and Erebus, the same chaplain Ahriman had once trusted, ushered the dying Primarch into the temple of the Serpent Lodge, where Davinite shamans and cultists of chaos worked their black rites. Horus's soul was cast into the Immaterium and shown a vision, a future Imperium of tyranny and blind worship, where the Emperor ruled as a god. It was true, but only because he himself would ensure it. Magnus, too, entered the warp, seeking to stop his brother's fall. He tried to show Horus the vision was only one possibility, not an unchangeable fate. But Horus, resentful and proud, embraced what he saw as his destiny. Magnus learned, to his dread, that Lorgar and the Word-Bearers had long since turned, that the corruption was already spreading, and the great betrayal had begun. And so Magnus turned to Ahriman and gave him his final command. See what comes, no matter the cost. And Ahriman obeyed. In desperation, Magnus the Red sought once more to save the Imperium. He had seen the War Master's betrayal before it had began, had glimpsed the dagger poised to strike the Emperor's back. With urgency, he cast his mind once more through the Immaterium, using sorcery to breach the psychic wards of the Imperial Palace and send a warning to his father. But in doing so, he shattered more than just walls. He tore through the Emperor's hidden work beneath Terra, a secret project meant to secure a human pathway into the webway. The Emperor, unwilling to believe that Horus, his beloved son, his favored creation, would ever betray him, turned his wrath instead upon Magnus. The Thousand Sons, long viewed with suspicion for their reliance on sorcery and their cursed mutations, were now seen as traitors. The Emperor gave the order. Leman Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves and ancient rival to Magnus, was dispatched with his legion. Alongside them marched the Sisters of Silence, the Witch Hunters, and the Emperor's own Custodes. The command was clear. Bring Magnus to Terra to face judgment for his violation of the Council of Nicaea. But Horus intervened. He whispered poison into Russ's ear, convincing him that Magnus's punishment should not be confinement, but annihilation. Russ, disgusted by Magnus's sorcery and blind to the deeper manipulations, obeyed. On Prospero, Magnus waited. His will broken, he chose inaction. He had seen the price of defiance. To resist would only prove the worst fears of their enemies. So he veiled the planet in psychic shrouds, preventing his own sorcerers from seeing their doom approach. It was then that Amon, his oldest friend and mentor, learned the full extent of Magnus's despair. The Primarch had murdered Balik Uthazar, captain of the Fifth Fellowship, to keep the knowledge of the approaching fleet hidden. He had done terrible things, he admitted, but he believed they were necessary. He believed he could not fight back, because to do so would mean surrendering to the path the ruinous powers had laid for him. Amon, however, could not accept this. He had once dreamed of Prospero's destruction, years before Magnus fell from the sky. The nightmare had haunted him until Magnus arrived, and now it had returned. He saw the end of all he loved on the horizon, and unlike his Primarch, he refused to let it pass unopposed. Then came fire. The Space Wolves' fleet arrived, tearing down Prospero's orbital defenses. Tzeentch, the shining capital of the Thousand Suns, was protected by a powerful psychic kind shield. As the rest of the planet turned to ash, Tzeentch stood until the wolves descended. Landing forces swarmed the city. Prosperines were slaughtered. Fires consumed everything. And still, Magnus did nothing. But the Legion did not share his passivity. They rose in defiance. They fought not to win, but to die on their feet. Before he faced his brother, Magnus entrusted Amon with a single object: the Book of Magnus, a tome containing all his accumulated knowledge of sorcery, psychers, and the secrets of the warp. Amon was to give it to Ahzek Ahriman, should he survive. It was the last gift of a Primarch to his sons. Then, Magnus faced Russ. On the steps of a shattered pyramid of glass and steel, they fought. The duel was terrible. In the end, Russ shattered Magnus's body, breaking his back. Defeated, Magnus opened a gateway into the warp and fled with the remnants of his legion to the Eye of Terror, where Tzeentch had prepared a demon world for him, Sortiarius, the planet of sorcerers. There, Magnus was remade. The Changer of the Ways rewarded his champion with immortality, transforming the Crimson King into a demon prince. But peace did not follow. In the eye of terror, the flesh change returned. The mutations began anew. Magnus, now a demon, seemed to accept it, but Ahriman did not. Bitter, disillusioned, and burning with hatred for what his legion had become and what his Primarch had allowed, Ahriman turned to the Book of Magnus. Within its pages, he searched for salvation, and from its boundless knowledge and his own anguish, he forged a spell of immense power, the Rubric. This spell would end the flesh change forever, but Ahriman lacked the power to cast it alone. So he gathered a cabal, the strongest sorcerers of the Legion, including Amon. Those who remained loyal to Magnus or excluded, dismissed as weak. Together, they unleashed the spell. And it both worked and failed. The Rubric burned through the 1,000 suns, sparing only those with psychic talent. For the rest, it was doom. Their bodies turned to ash, their souls trapped inside their armor. The Rubricae were born, mindless, unfeeling, and undying. Ahriman was horrified. The spell had done what it promised, but at a price none had foreseen. What remained of the Legion had been transformed into a shell of its former self. Powerful, yes, but hollow. When Magnus had learned what Ahriman had done, he stormed the Tower of Sorcery, where the Cabal had gathered. Most fell to their knees in remorse. Ahriman stood. Magnus raised his hand to strike, but he was stayed. Tzeentch himself intervened, saving Ahriman for a future role in his plans. Instead of death, the sorcerer was given exile. Ahriman and his cabal were banished from Sortiarius. In exile, Amon sought redemption. He wished to undo what had been done, to free the Rubricae from their eternal prison. Over centuries, he amassed power, founding his own warband of exiled 1,000 Sons, the Brotherhood of Dust. He sought out old brothers. Those who joined survived. Those who refused did not. Meanwhile, Ahriman hid among the ranks of a corn-worshipping warband known as the Harrowing, living in disguise as a lowly sorcerer named Horkos. But Amon's reach was long. He sent Tolbeck, a Pyre sorcerer and member of Ahriman's original cabal, to find him. Tolbeck found his quarry and revealed Ahriman's identity. The sorcerer, exposed, unleashed his full might. He slew his former allies, but not before Tolbeck attempted to drag his mind into oblivion. Ahriman barely escaped. Amon sent more agents, demons, even a half-demon prince. All failed. Eventually, Ahriman tracked Aemon himself, but before he could strike, he was betrayed by the mistress of his stolen ship. Wounded, he was subdued and brought aboard Sycorax, Aemon's flagship. There, Aemon demanded the secrets of the Rubric. Ahriman at last agreed. But during a rescue attempt by his allies, Ahriman confronted Aemon once more. The two dueled, minds locked in a psychic struggle. In the end, Ahriman revealed the truth. The Rubric lived in them all. It was bound to their very souls. And with that, Ahriman unraveled Aemon from the inside out. His armor tore apart, dust spilled into the wind. The armor reassembled, plate by plate, over Ahriman's own body, reshaping him in the image of his fallen brother. The Brotherhood of Dust stood in stunned silence. Ahriman raised his hands, summoned warp flame. The red armor of Aemon's followers shifted to sapphire. Rubric and sorcerers alike were reborn in Tzeentch's hue. Ahriman knelt, bowed his head to the past, and rose as the new master of the Brotherhood of Dust. Whether the warband he commands now in the 41st Millennium, the Prodigal Sons, is the same force reborn under a new name remains uncertain. But one truth endures. Ahriman walks the galaxy still, cloaked in flame and fate, his sins burned into the armor he wears. Among the countless atrocities committed by Ahriman, few speak so clearly to his devastating blend of subtlety, power, and ruthlessness as the event known as the Harvest of Calliope. This world, once a monument to knowledge, existed solely to archive the records of the Imperium, from its mythic founding to its uncertain present. Its very ecology revolved around this purpose. Cities built around ancient index vaults, data-spool void stations orbiting from pole to pole, and vast cavernous stacks of rotting parchment that burrowed deep into the crust. Every soul on Calliope played their part. Hunters, clearing vermin from forgotten archives, scribes, vying for dominance over contradictory indexes. For as long as memory stretched, this was the way of things. But then something changed. A new movement emerged from within the caste of indexers, an intellectual faction calling themselves the Summation. They believed that all knowledge could be unified into a single, endlessly extending formula. None could say from where the idea had originated, but once seeded, it spread rapidly, blooming like a lotus in sunlight. Over generations, the Summation grew in power until it ruled Calliope unchallenged. Billions toiled across centuries to complete the vision. And at last, on the day of the Emperor's ascension, in the High Hall of Indexes, the final line of symbols was inscribed. At that precise moment, the planet fell silent. When an Imperial void ship arrived 10 standard years later, it found only a few emaciated survivors wandering among dry corpses. The minds of those left behind, still broken, could retain no memory for more than a few fleeting seconds. Stranger still, every archive was blank. Data stores were wiped clean. Scrolls, books, slates, every page barren. There was only one remnant of what had occurred, an image lingering in the scorched memory of the survivors. A figure in a horned helm, cloaked in flame, stepping from a wound in the air. He had come to claim the fruits of Calliope's labor, harvested at last by the hand that had planted the summation seed so many lifetimes ago. Ahriman himself. There existed an object of great importance to Ahriman, the silver-dipped skull of Lepidus, a martyr of the Second of Black Crusade, engraved with 10,000 words of detestation. It lay sealed in a polar shrine city on Dianaxis, a mausoleum world revered throughout the Imperium. Ahriman had once sought to claim the skull by guile and conspiracy, but when that failed, he turned to fire and war. For nearly 8 millennia, the honored dead of humanity had been brought to Dianaxis. Bodies of martyrs, charred bones of warriors, polished skulls of Astartes. The very cities were built from the remains of heroes. 12 Space Marine chapters maintained permanent bastions there. Star fortresses watched from orbit. Millions stood vigil over the bones of the dead. But far away, Ahriman began a ritual of alignment. He burned worlds, ending lives in swaths, each death part of a greater pattern. As the sacrificed systems spun into a perfect design, Dianaxis was drawn to the center. The moment the alignment was complete, its sun was torn from reality, leaving a screaming hole in the sky. The mausoleum world descended into chaos. Rainbow-hued fire licked at bone towers. The screams of the dead echoed, their last thoughts unleashed. Through the void where the sun once burned, demons descended like meteors. Imperial defenders were overwhelmed, their souls devoured. In the midst of this apocalypse, Ahriman appeared, just like on Calliope, but this time surrounded by a circle of sorcerers and Rubric. Arcane fire melted flesh and spirit alike. Honor guards from Space Marine chapters charged, only to be reduced to dust in an instant. Then came Firebane, the last warlord-class titan of Legio Officium. Its warhorn shook the dying world as it opened fire. But Ahriman, drawing upon his sorcerer's brethren, brought the mighty engine to its knees, ripping its plasma reactor core through its own carapace in a torrent of molten death. At last, Ahriman held the skull of Lepidus in his hand. One word etched upon its surface held what he sought. With the deed done, he let it fall and vanished into the warp, leaving Dionysus in ruin, bones burning, demons howling, and no one left to mourn. And for centuries further, Ahriman scoured the galaxy in pursuit of another forbidden prize: entry into the Black Library, the Eldari's hidden repository of ancient knowledge, secrets of chaos, the warp, and the very fabric of reality. Long did he wage war within the twisting passages of the webway. Time and again, he was repelled by the spectral guardians and agile harlequins. And yet, he persisted. Eventually, Ahriman found a path, one that bypassed physical resistance, projecting his mind telepathically into the sanctum. He walked its shadowed halls in spirit, even as his body transcribed the revelations he was witnessing. Among the treasures he stole from that incorporeal pilgrimage was a priceless copy of the Tome of Labyrinthus, a sacred harlequin map to the secret routes of the webway, knowledge that would one day reshape the galaxy. Long after the rubric was cast, and the rift between master and son had grown into legend, Ahriman was summoned by no less than Magnus the Red himself. For the first time since that fateful day on Prospero, the Crimson King and his former chief librarian stood united once more. Vengeance, shared and burning, brought them together. The destruction of the Space Wolves. Their moment came not long before the 13th Black Crusade. The Fenris system, home to the Sons of Russ, found itself suddenly racked by violent warp storms. From within these unnatural gales surged legions of demons, rending through space and sanity alike. The Space Wolves had only just rediscovered their long-lost wolfenkin when the skies turned dark with chaos. Imperial reinforcements came swiftly. The Grey Knights and the Dark Angels answered the call to arms, descending into the system to aid their embattled brothers. But among the swirling madness, reason faltered. A terrible manipulation was afoot. One of Tzeentch's greatest tricksters, the Changeling, wove lies and illusions so deft that mistrust blossomed like rot among the Imperials. Allies turned suspicious, coordination crumbled, and still the storm intensified. It was the Grey Knights who saw it first, who read the pattern in the warp, etched in madness and stormlight. It was a sigil not seen for 10,000 years, a symbol of vengeance, the mark of Prospero. And then they came. 9 silver towers descended from the warp-churned skies above Fenris. From these massive spires of impossible architecture poured forth the 1,000 suns, accompanied by shrieking Zangors and mutated cultists. Scarab occult terminators marched through the ice and blood, their ancient armor gleaming with sickly light. Rubric marines followed behind them, silent sentinels of the past, eyes aglow with magical flame. From secret portals and hidden rifts, more warbands emerged. These were exiles, once scattered across the stars. Now they returned through Ahriman's mastery of the webway. They struck hard and fast, emerging from the labyrinth dimension with psychic fire crackling from their hands. The Adeptus Astartes were caught off guard. Flames consumed the snow. As Imperial lines buckled and broke, the silver towers drifted into alignment with the planet's geomantic nodes, sites of deep and ancient power. On the 3rd solar day of the invasion, the skies were torn open by fire. Sorcerers across Fenris poured their will into a great ritual. In the heart of each silver tower, a space wolf was sacrificed, boiled alive in cauldrons of blood and warp gore. This grotesque rite tore a hole in reality. From the breach stepped a god, Magnus the Red. The Crimson King returned to real space, his arrival shaking the ice world to its molten core. He joined Ahriman and their greatest acolytes at the center of the ritual, deep within the towers. The energy unleashed began to twist the very land. Rivers boiled, mountains cracked, and the volcano beneath the Fang, the fortress monastery of the Space Wolves, erupted with demonic presence. The tide did not turn until Midgardia, a neighboring world, was destroyed entirely. With its annihilation, the Silver Towers vanished. To the Imperium, it seemed a desperate victory, but it was no victory. Midgardia's death was a harvest, and Magnus reaped it well. With that power, he completed a long-buried ambition. The planet of the Sorcerers, home to the 1,000 suns, was torn from the warp and returned to real space, hovering now above the corpse of lost Prospero, like a ghost returned to haunt the living. In the twilight hours of the 41st millennium, as the 13th Black Crusade engulfed the galaxy in ruin, Ahriman turned his gaze once more to the hidden paths of the webway. Forbidden knowledge beckoned, secrets entombed within the black library of the Eldari. Twice, during the chaos of Abaddon's uprising, did the Arch-Sorcerer breach the hidden labyrinth, chasing answers that had eluded him for 10 millennia. His first intrusion was made possible by a most curious prize: the captured Inquisitor, Bronislaw Zevak. Once welcomed, begrudgingly, by the Eldari as a guest of the Black Library, Zevak had been little more than a pawn in the game the Eldar thought they controlled. Ahriman, however, had other plans. From Zevak's memories, he gleaned ancient truths. The trail led him to the forgotten world of Atemium 3, a seemingly insignificant planet once under the watch of Craftworld Altensar, long since lost to the Eye of Terror. There, his agents uncovered a dormant webway portal. Ahriman entered with haste and fury. The Eldari were not prepared. The incursion sparked panic among the Farseers. None had foreseen it, not even the greatest among them, Eldrad Ulthran of Ulthwé, whose presence was hastily summoned to mount the Eldari defense. The battle was swift and terrible, but in the end, Ahriman was repelled. The gate he had used was sealed, buried beneath layers of warding, never to open again. The secretive Order Psychana, a brotherhood composed solely of Blood Raven's librarians, was called to take over the portal's guardianship. Though too late to aid the defense, they ensured the rift would never threaten the Imperium again. But the Arch-Sorcerer's ambition was not so easily thwarted. Soon after, he foresaw another breach, this time not by his hand, but by a librarian of the Blood Ravens named Rama, during operations on the icy world of Lorn 5. Rama's ritual had torn open a pocket in the fabric of the webway. Ahriman moved swiftly. With his elite warband, the Prodigal Sons, Ahriman traveled to Lorn 5 under a shroud of deception. Demons flocked to his will. Through arcane sorcery and exploitation of the dimensional wound left by Rama, he pierced the veil once more, this time reaching Arcadia, the sacred planet of law, home to the enigmatic Harlequins. Arcadia was no ordinary world. Hidden within were vast, concealed repositories of Eldari lore, relics of a time before time, including the fabled Librarian, a vault of knowledge predating the Fall. Here, Ahriman hoped to find a way into the Black Library. He carried with him the Tome of Kerbenian, a book thought mythical, taken from the Harlequin solitaire who bore its name. With this artifact, he sought the sword of Lanithrak, a weapon wielded in the ancient war against the Catan. It was held by the great Harlequin, and Ahriman aimed to take it. Among his trophies was a prisoner of immense importance, Ethereal Stern, once a sister of battle, now a demon fuge, a being whose existence straddled the veil between damnation and salvation. Ahriman had plans for her too, once his conquest was complete. But conquest eluded him once again. Even the summoning of a massive manta-like warp leviathan could not turn the tide. The Harlequins fought with a grace and fury born of ages. Casualties mounted, demons fell, and Ahriman was cast out once more, driven from the webway with none of his goals achieved. Yet in failure his legend grew. He had come closer to the Black Library than any mortal had right to. He had outwitted the Asarnyani, captured Sevak, and pierced the veil of one of the oldest secrets in the galaxy. To Magnus the Red, it was enough. Ahriman's star once more ascended. In the stillness that followed Cadia's fall and the birth of the Great Rift, Ahriman's purpose sharpened. Hidden demon spies had whispered of something strange, of Eldari who had defied death, who returned not as revenants, but resurrected souls reborn. The Inari. Within them, Ahriman saw possibility. If the dead could return, then so too might his lost brothers, the Rubric Marines, trapped in shells of dust and sorrow. And so, when the Inari moved toward the ice moons of Classius, seeking to ally with the survivors of Cadia, Ahriman made his move. Through sacrifice and sorcery, he enacted a forbidden rite. 999 captives were offered to Tzeentch. With that blood price, Ahriman and his 1,000 sons were translocated across the webway, arriving in the crystalline tunnels of the Saga Delta, just as the Inari passed through. The ambush was sudden and brutal. Warp fire painted the walls in sickly colors. Sorcerer's bolts and wailing demons clashed with harlequin blades and Ynnari's soul magic. And in the heart of the storm, Ahriman seized the triumvirate of Ynid, Ravain, the Vissar, and the mysterious Incarnate, pulling them into a private realm outside space and time. Here, in a void of his own making, Ahriman prepared to draw the knowledge he craved from the champions of the death god Ynid. But Ravain had seen beyond his plans. As the arch-sorcerer prepared his psychic blades, she reached toward the impossible and offered a gift. With a whisper and a surge of divine energy, she resurrected 12 Rubric Marines. Warriors, long believed lost to the Rubric, stood once more in flesh and blood, dazed but alive. They looked upon Ahriman not as their destroyer, but as their battle brother. And for the first time in 10,000 years, he saw them see him. Overcome, Ahriman released the Inari from the void, but it was too late. A Wraith Knight tore through the webway walls, cleaving open a massive rift. As the Eldari forces fled, the Incarnate inhaled deeply, and with a terrible wail, dragged the newly reborn 1,000 sons into the abyss. Ahriman screamed. They were gone again, resurrected only to be lost once more. Yet the seed had been planted. The Rubric could be undone. It was possible. And he now knew who held the key. In the wake of his shattering revelation within the webway, Ahzek Ahriman was a changed being. For 10,000 standard years he had wandered the warp, driven by a singular obsession to undo the Rubric, to restore the minds and flesh of his fallen brothers. The 1,000 sons turned to ash within their armor. Time and again he had failed, but now, after witnessing the miracle wrought on by Ivrain, priestess of Ynid, he no longer searched blindly in the dark. He knew the power existed. He had seen it. He had felt it. With the emergence of the Great Rift, it shook the foundations of the Imperium and rent the veil between realms. In this chaos, Ahriman saw a path forward. The psychic tide surged stronger than ever. The warp whispered new truths. As the galaxy burned, Ahriman gathered his strength. He summoned the remnants of the prodigal sons, those sorcerers still loyal to his path, and bent his gaze toward the screaming heart of dark ambition, the twisted metropolis of Kamara, the seat of the Drakari. If Ivrain and the Inari could touch the dead and breathe life into dust, then there would be whispers of such things in Kamarag's underworld. The city of suffering held secrets traded in agony, and lore bartered through screams. Ahriman would find what he sought there, or rip it from the darkness. For now, the Arch-Sorcerer set his will upon the road to resurrection. Not for glory, not for vengeance, but for the souls of his legion, forgotten by time, entombed in dust, who at last might yet live again.